Undercover CEO enters his own store and sees a cashier crying, but what happens next is worse. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. And, while you're here, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. Thank you so much. Now, let's return to our main character. The ones who do the work don't get the pay. The one who gets it is the manager's nephew. She said it like it was normal. No one asked. No one checked. But that morning, right inside a Grayson's market, the company's founder was standing just a few feet away, disguised as a stranger. What he heard in that single moment made the entire system start to collapse in his mind. It was supposed to be an ordinary grocery run. The automatic doors slid open, the cold blast of air conditioning spilled out, and customers pushed carts across squeaky linoleum floors. Under the bright fluorescent lights, everything looked fine. Rows of cereal boxes stacked high, produce misted every few minutes. A familiar corporate jingle looping softly over the speakers. On the surface, it was just another American supermarket. But at Register 6, something didn't fit. Emma, a young cashier with blonde hair tied back, was blinking hard, her sleeve brushing the corner of her eye as she scanned groceries. Her hands moved on autopilot: milk, bread, canned beans, but her expression betrayed her. She was crying quietly at work. Not from exhaustion, not from a bad day, but because her paycheck kept coming up short. Jackson Hale, the man in the gray t-shirt and baseball cap, caught it the moment he stepped in. To anyone else, he was just another middle-aged shopper with a small basket. Nobody knew that behind the plain clothes stood the 4-year-old founder and CEO of Grayson's Market, a chain worth over $2 billion, with more than 400 stores across the Midwest. Nobody knew the man they ignored had built the very building they were standing in. And that was exactly why he came unannounced. He hadn't arrived to check sales numbers or inspect inventory. Those reports were already sitting on his desk in neat quarterly binders. He came for something numbers could never show: the truth about how his people were treated when no one thought the boss was watching. From the end of the checkout lane, he saw Emma's forced smile. A customer asked if she was okay. Her reply was quiet, but clear enough to cut through the beeping of the scanner. Morning shifts are the worst. Hours get shaved off the schedule. Some of us don't even see half of what we earned. She said it like it was routine, like complaining wouldn't matter anymore. The customer shrugged and rolled the cart forward. No one challenged it. No one even looked up. Jackson set 3 items on the belt: a bottle of water, a pack of gum, and a can of soup. His voice was even casual, the kind strangers use to pass time. "Busy morning, huh? Tips not bad?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then her smile faltered. "There are no tips here, just schedules that don't add up." She rang up his items without breaking eye contact. It was only a small crack in the surface, but for Jackson it was enough. A business could survive lower margins. It could recover from a few bad customer reviews. But when the people holding the front line started believing the system was rigged against them, that was the real danger. That was what killed a company from the inside out. Emma slipped his receipt across the counter. Tucked inside, almost invisible, was a folded slip of paper. Jackson opened it later in his truck. On it were dates, hours, and red-circled discrepancies. The kind of details no one would ever see unless they asked. She had been documenting her missing wages quietly for weeks. The total loss was over $600 in a single month. For a cashier making barely above minimum wage, it wasn't just money, it was survival. Jackson exhaled slowly. The drizzle outside blurred the windshield as he sat in silence. On paper, this branch had looked fine, better than fine. Sales up, costs down. But now he saw what those numbers were hiding. A culture where the people who worked hardest were made invisible. He pulled out his phone, snapped photos of every note, every red circle. Then he wrote one short line on a sticky note. "Keep documenting. Don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." He tucked it back into the slip, folded it shut, and slid it beneath the coffee cup in his console. That was the beginning. Just a few quiet questions, an old notebook, and a silent investigation that would change everything. Jackson stayed in his truck longer than necessary. The drizzle outside wasn't heavy, just enough to blur the windshield, like the town itself wanted to fog over what was really happening. On the passenger seat, the receipt with Emma's folded slip of paper sat untouched. He hadn't come for groceries. Not really. And the plain jacket he wore with a stitched name tag wasn't real either. It was borrowed, just enough to make him ordinary, just enough to let him watch without being seen. From the driver's seat, he observed the crew through the front windows. They moved around behind the counters, stocking shelves, prepping for customers. But their rhythm didn't feel like pride. It felt like survival. Motions pulled from memory, not intention. On paper, this branch was performing well, sales were up, revenue had even surpassed targets 3 quarters in a row. But the turnover rate here was nearly 40%, the highest in the region, and employee engagement ranked last. The spreadsheets didn't explain why. Sitting there, Jackson realized he was looking at the missing piece. He stepped out into the chill, pulled his cap lower, and entered. The automatic doors slid open, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and a faint bell at the front gave a hollow welcome. No one looked up. No one asked his name. Only the echo of the door acknowledged him. He wandered slowly, basket loose in his hand, but his eyes were on the employees. That's when he noticed Mark Coleman, the store manager. Shirt crisp, pen clipped neatly to his pocket, posture confident. To customers, he looked competent, even likable. But Jackson saw the details. Mark never touched a register. He rarely helped on the floor. Instead, he lingered near the back office, stepping out only when schedules or money came up. Emma, meanwhile, carried herself differently. Not louder, not faster, just more intentional. Her sleeves frayed, apron clean but faded. She moved with a quiet precision that kept the checkout lanes flowing while others drifted. Jackson kept his distance, observing. Near the scheduling terminal, 2 younger employees hovered. Neither was serving customers. They tapped the screen, checked entries, leaned back with folded arms. Every digital hour, every payroll record passed through them. Jackson caught a glimpse of the screen as he moved closer. Access levels, role restrictions. Emma's name sat in the supplemental category, the invisible list. That meant she couldn't log her own hours, couldn't access digital adjustments, couldn't collect the pay she'd truly earned. Later, as she passed him near the end of an aisle, Emma lowered her voice. I started writing it down, every shift, every paycheck short. She touched her apron where a small notebook was tucked away. Jackson nodded faintly. You did the right thing, he said, keeping his tone neutral. I just needed to know I wasn't crazy, she whispered. That sentence struck deeper than any spreadsheet. A company could recover from low margins. It could survive bad reviews. But once employees started doubting whether their own reality was real, the trust that kept everything alive was already broken. Jackson didn't confront anyone that morning. He bought a few items, paid cash at Emma's register, and left quietly. The drizzle had stopped, but inside him a storm had already begun. It would only take a few silent questions, a hidden audit, and the truth would no longer stay hidden. Jackson didn't need more proof that something was wrong, but Emma gave it to him anyway. When she returned to the register after stocking a bag of flour, she slipped her hand into her apron and pulled out the small notebook. Its edges were worn, the cover bent from being folded too many times. She held it like something fragile, something too important to lose. I started keeping track, she whispered when no one else was close. Dates, shifts, the hours I was supposed to be paid, and what I actually got. I'm down more than $600 in just a month. Jackson took the notebook carefully, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting. Each entry listed the shift date, clock in and clock out times, the hours that appeared on the schedule, and the smaller number that showed up on her paycheck. Red circles marked the missing hours. Notes in the margins explained who had been at the scheduling terminal each day. Tyler, Chase. And at the top of nearly every page, one word repeated in bold red ink, short. It wasn't an accusation. It was evidence. The kind that most executives never see because no one dares to collect it. Jackson closed the notebook gently, not with finality, but with respect. Emma's voice shook. What hurts more isn't the money. It's that nobody asks who changes the hours. Nobody checks. Jackson exhaled. A company could endure thin margins. It could recover from slow growth. But if the best people started believing the system itself didn't see them, that was the real danger. That was how a business died quietly from the inside out. He didn't confront Mark. Not yet. He paid for another bottle of water and tucked the notebook under his jacket until he could slip it back. At the counter, he left her a short note on a piece of scrap paper. "Keep documenting. Don't give this to anyone else. Wait for me to return." Out in the parking lot, Jackson slid into his truck. He pulled out his phone, angled it toward the notebook before giving it back, and snapped photos of every page. Line by line, red circle by red circle, the story unfolded clearly. This wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. He tapped a number on his phone. When the call connected, his voice was low but steady. "Mara, it's me. We have a problem. I need you to go in quiet, line by line, every schedule, every payroll adjustment, every role restriction." Mara Lynn had led internal investigations for years. She didn't ask questions. She only said, "Understood." Jackson leaned back in his seat. The drizzle had stopped, but inside him, the storm was only getting stronger. The silent audit had begun. Jackson sat quietly in the corner booth of a small cafe across the street, Emma's notebook still resting in front of him. He didn't flip through the pages again. He didn't need to. Every entry, every red circle, matched what he had already witnessed on the floor. The names, the hours, the paychecks that didn't line up. His instincts had whispered it for weeks, but now he had something more evidence. He angled the notebook discreetly, snapping photos of every page with his phone. Each date, each margin note, each discrepancy was captured. Then he pulled out a pen and a sticky note, writing in block letters, "Keep documenting, but don't give this to anyone. Wait for me to return." He slipped it into the front cover and closed the notebook carefully, almost reverently, before returning it to her. Back at the store, Jackson positioned himself near the registers again. That's when his eyes caught something he hadn't expected. Tyler, a young employee with slicked back hair and a perfectly pressed uniform, stood alone behind the scheduling terminal. His fingers tapped across the touchscreen with a familiarity that didn't belong to a part-time worker. Jackson leaned just enough to glimpse the screen. For a second, it was clear. User role settings. Access level. Advanced. Username. Tyler C. Jackson's hand tightened around his basket. A cashier like Emma couldn't even log her own hours, but this teenager had access to advanced settings. That wasn't an accident. It was permission. A new employee hesitated nearby, fumbling with a tray of stock. Clearly nervous, she whispered to Emma for help. Without pause, Emma guided her through the system, showing her how to flag allergy information, adjust product codes, and handle special modifiers. Then, in a low voice meant only for her trainee, she added, "Careful not to let Tyler help you. He won't do it for you." Jackson heard that, and in that moment, he understood Emma wasn't just doing her job. She was quietly holding the moral structure of this branch together while others stood by and let the system tilt further out of balance. Minutes later, another employee tapped the terminal and frowned. "That's weird," he muttered. "I could log in yesterday. Today it says restricted." Tyler smirked faintly. "Probably just a glitch. I'll take care of it." Jackson tilted his head slightly, still expressionless, but inside, his mind was already mapping the pattern. Hidden access tiers, selective restrictions, a funnel that made sure certain people always got more, while others disappeared into the supplemental list. The coffee in his cup was cold now, but he didn't need caffeine. His blood was already heating, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't sloppy management. It was deliberate. By the time Jackson stepped back into the drizzle that afternoon, he knew the next move. It was no longer about suspicion. It was about proof. That evening, his call lasted less than 2 minutes. His voice was low but steady. "Mara, we have a problem. The scheduling system is being manipulated. I need you to go in quiet, line by line. Every role assignment, every payroll record." On the other end, Mara Lynn, head of internal investigations, didn't ask questions. She just said, "Understood." Within hours, the system at Branch 17 was switched into silent audit mode. Everything would look normal to staff, but every hidden override, every unauthorized role change, Every missing dollar would now be recorded in real time. The investigation had officially begun. By the next morning, the silent audit was already pulling threads from the inside. To everyone on the floor, the store looked the same: aisles restocked, customers filing in, scanners beeping steadily. But underneath the surface, every click, every payroll entry, every access override was now being tracked in real time. The first findings came back quickly. Finding number 1. The scheduling system had been modified with a hidden tier called Preferred Internal. This level didn't appear on the staff-facing screen, but it carried privileges above standard managers. Only 3 accounts had the tier. One belonged to Mark Coleman, the store manager. The second, to Tyler C., the part-time employee Jackson had seen lingering at the terminal. And the third, an account labeled Stock Support 03, had no assigned employee attached. That third account set off alarms. Finding number 2. Over the last 30 days, payroll data showed hours worked at this branch totaled over 4,800, but nearly 70% of logged overtime and adjusted pay had been funneled through Tyler's account, even though he covered less than 15% of actual shifts. The numbers didn't lie. Someone had designed a funnel, one that redirected pay from the workers who earned it to those who had access. Finding number 3. One name kept appearing across early morning shifts: Marcus Hill. The logs showed him clocked in 21 times in the past month, but HR had no file for him, no tax documentation. The Social Security number on record had already been flagged as a duplicate in another branch 2 years earlier, during an investigation that had quietly been dropped. The manager at that branch back then? Mark Coleman. And there was more. Finance traced small weekly transfers listed as third-party staffing logistics. On paper, they looked legitimate payments routed to an LLC called Henderson & Sons. But the contact information linked back to an email once used by Mark himself. The amounts matched the missing wage differentials to the dollar. Jackson read the report on his phone, his jaw set. This wasn't incompetence. It was engineered. A system meant to be transparent had been twisted into a private pipeline, moving money away from the floor staff and into the hands of a family network. He looked out at the parking lot, where Emma was helping a customer load groceries into the trunk of an old sedan. Her sleeves were still frayed, but her pace was steady, as if the weight of being unseen had simply become part of her routine. She had no idea that her notebook was now the keystone in exposing the fraud that had been bleeding her dry. Jackson didn't walk back inside. Not yet. He knew timing mattered. Evidence had to be airtight before confrontation. For now, silence was power. That afternoon, he placed a second call to Mara. His words were simple. Keep digging. Don't stop until you have the full map. Every account, every role change, every payment. I want the entire picture. Mara's reply came sharp and steady. Already on it. And with that, the invisible storm inside Branch 17 grew darker. The staff still poured coffee, bagged produce, and stocked shelves, unaware that every keystroke now served as proof. The walls were closing in. 3 days later, Jackson returned to Branch 17. This time, he wasn't wearing the gray t-shirt or the baseball cap pulled low. He walked in with a pressed jacket, a steady gait, and a face no longer hiding. The founder of Grayson's Market wasn't undercover anymore. The staff noticed first. Emma froze mid-scan when she looked up and saw him standing at the end of her lane, posture calm but undeniable. Behind him, 2 district managers from headquarters followed in silence, each carrying a folder. The hum of the scanners kept going, but the air felt heavier, like the building itself knew what was about to happen. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a folder on the counter, flat, deliberate. His words were even, but every syllable carried weight. Payroll has been manipulated. Hours erased. Accounts fabricated. I built this company so every worker would be paid for what they earned, not so family ties could rewrite the rules. He opened the folder. Charts, audit logs, screenshots. The proof no one could deny. Mark Coleman stepped forward, still trying to keep his smile. There must be some mistake, a system glitch. Jackson cut him off with a look, calm but sharp. Marcus Hill doesn't exist, yet he's collected over $2,000 in this store alone. Tyler has logged hours equal to 5 employees combined, and you authorized a hidden access tier. This isn't a glitch, it's a design. Silence spread across the floor. Emma stood motionless, her hand hovering above a loaf of bread she'd been scanning. Customers nearby had stopped mid-transaction, eyes shifting between the manager and the man they now realized wasn't just another shopper. Mark's voice cracked as he tried again. "I can explain." "You won't need to," Jackson replied. "The explanation is already in the data, and the decision is already made." He turned slightly toward the district managers. "Effective immediately, Mark Coleman is suspended pending termination review. Tyler C. is relieved of duties. Audit findings are being referred to corporate compliance and state regulators." The words landed like a gavel. No shouting, no spectacle, just finality. Emma blinked, the weight in her chest breaking into something lighter, something she hadn't felt in months. For the first time, someone had said out loud what she had been documenting quietly in her notebook all along. Jackson looked at her, steady but gentle. "You kept the record when no one else did. That's how this came to light. You won't be invisible anymore." Her eyes filled, but she nodded quickly, holding herself together. The store was still. The only sound was the faint buzz of the lights overhead, until one customer whispered under their breath, "He's the owner." And just like that, recognition spread. Phones lifted, eyes widened. The stranger who had stood in line days earlier was the man who signed their paychecks. Jackson didn't linger. He closed the folder, tucked it under his arm, and said simply, "This isn't about punishment. It's about rebuilding trust, and trust starts today." Then he walked toward the exit, leaving the weight of his words behind. The reveal was complete. The next morning, the store felt different. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The same aisles were stocked with cereal and produce, but the weight in the air had shifted. Mark's office was locked, Tyler's badge deactivated, and the whispers from staff carried something new relief. Emma stood at her register, but for the first time in weeks, her shoulders weren't tense. When she logged into the system, the screen looked unfamiliar. A new update had been rolled out overnight. Every employee now had access to their own digital hours. No more hidden tiers. No more supplemental categories. If a shift was worked, it was visible. If overtime was earned, it was listed. Transparency, built into the system itself. Halfway through her shift, the district manager approached with a sealed envelope. Emma hesitated, then opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a check covering every missing dollar she had documented, plus an additional bonus for her diligence. She swallowed hard, tears forming, but this time they weren't from frustration, they were from validation. Around her, other employees experienced the same. Back pay issued, corrected records uploaded, emails from headquarters confirming the reforms. One by one, the staff realized they hadn't imagined the unfairness. They hadn't been crazy or complaining. They had been right all along. Jackson returned quietly that afternoon, not with folders or accusations, but with a calm presence. He walked the floor, greeted each employee by name, and stopped at Emma's register. "You kept the truth alive," he told her softly. "That notebook changed everything. And from today, you're not just a cashier. You'll be training others on this new system." Her eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Jackson said simply. "Because you proved integrity matters, even when no one's watching." The staff gathered, some clapping softly, others just nodding with quiet pride. It wasn't a spectacle, no viral video moment, just a shift in the foundation of how they worked. A silent wrong had been replaced with a louder right. Customers noticed it too. The checkout lanes moved smoother, the staff smiled more genuinely, and for once, the conversations weren't whispered complaints but hopeful remarks. One customer leaned over to another and said, "Feels different here today." The other nodded. "Feels honest." By evening, as the sun set against the glass storefront, Emma closed her register with steady hands. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't alone. For Jackson, that was the point. A company could advertise all it wanted, post slogans about fairness and values, but true leadership wasn't in the press releases. It was in moments like this when the quietest voice was finally heard, and the system changed because of it. The resolution wasn't loud. There were no cameras, no headlines, no public spectacle. just dignity restored, hours corrected, and a store that finally felt like it belonged to the people who kept it alive. Justice had arrived, not with noise, but with truth. That evening, Jackson drove away from Branch 17 with the windows rolled down, the summer air carrying the faint smell of asphalt after rain. The notebook Emma had filled with careful handwriting now rested on the passenger seat beside him. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices held the strongest truth. He thought about the numbers that had once looked so solid on quarterly reports. Revenue up, expenses down, efficiency higher than forecasted. But behind those metrics was a culture rotting in silence. A place where theft wasn't measured in dollars alone, it was measured in dignity. Employees had been robbed of their hours, their pay, their faith in the system. And for a time, no one noticed. No one asked, but Emma did. And that changed everything. Jackson's reflection wasn't about punishment. Firing Mark or deactivating Tyler's account was necessary. But it wasn't the heart of the story. The real story was about trust. Because a company could survive scandals, lawsuits, even market losses. But once trust disappeared, everything else crumbled. He remembered Emma's words. "I just needed to know I wasn't crazy." That sentence replayed in his head like an indictment, not against her, but against the culture that had made her doubt reality. Leaders weren't supposed to let their people feel invisible. Leaders were supposed to guard their dignity as fiercely as their profit margins. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson pulled over, letting the car idle while he looked out across the quiet town. His voice, calm but steady, carried a message not just for his employees but for anyone who had ever felt overlooked. A business doesn't die from competition. It dies when the people who make it run start believing their work doesn't matter. When the honest feel unseen, that's when the real collapse begins. For Jackson, the lesson was simple. Leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the name on the building. It was about action, even when no one was watching. It was about listening to the quiet truth, hiding in a folded slip of paper or a handwritten notebook. He put the car back in gear and drove on, headlights cutting through the fading light. Back at Branch 17, Emma and the others were closing out registers, finishing stock counts, preparing the store for another day. But this time, they would leave knowing their hours were safe, their pay was honest, and their voices mattered. Jackson didn't need applause or headlines. What mattered was that integrity had been restored, quietly but firmly. And as he disappeared down the road, the story he carried wasn't about loss, it was about rebuilding trust, one employee at a time. Within a week, the changes at Branch 17 spread across the entire chain. Every Grayson's Market location received a system update. For the first time, employees could log in with their own ID and see every shift, every hour, every paycheck entry in real time. No more blind spots, no more hidden categories. The impact was immediate. Calls poured into headquarters from stores hundreds of miles away. Some were shocked, others were relieved. A few, like Emma, finally had confirmation that what they felt wasn't just in their heads. Missing hours appeared. Overtime corrected itself. And managers who once controlled the system like gatekeepers suddenly had no place to hide. Jackson reviewed the reports from his office late one night. Store after store, names appeared on the compliance log. Accounts suspended, roles stripped. In some locations, the fraud was small, a few hours skimmed here and there. In others, the patterns were nearly identical to Branch 17. It wasn't one bad manager. It was a shadow network. The board demanded explanations. Regulators opened inquiries. But for Jackson, the message to his employees mattered more than the press releases. He sent a direct memo to every store. Not written by PR, but in his own words. "You will be paid for the hours you work. You will see the numbers yourself. If anyone tells you otherwise, you call us directly. No one should feel invisible in the company they keep alive." At Branch 17, Emma read the memo on the break room bulletin board. For once, it didn't feel like corporate noise. It felt personal. She looked at her coworkers, who stood quietly, reading the same lines. Some nodded. Some smiled faintly. For the first time in months, they believed the company was on their side. Meanwhile, Mark's office sat empty, the door locked. Tyler's nameplate had been stripped from the schedule. In their absence, the store didn't collapse. In fact, It ran smoother. Without manipulation, the system balanced itself. Hours were fair, pay was clear, and employees stopped whispering, they started trusting. Customers noticed too. They didn't know the details, but they felt it. The atmosphere was lighter, the staff more engaged. A woman in line turned to her friend and said, "It feels like people want to be here again." Jackson didn't need to hear applause, but he did hear something more valuable, a store breathing again. The resolution wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no viral clips or breaking headlines. It was quiet, steady, systemic, a chain of stores shifting from mistrust to fairness, one update at a time. For Emma, it was as simple as closing her register with dry eyes and steady hands. She no longer wondered if her hours would vanish. She no longer felt like a ghost in her own workplace. For Jackson, that was victory enough. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, written in corrected paychecks and visible schedules. Sometimes it was as quiet as dignity restored. The storm at Branch 17 had passed, but the lesson remained. Weeks later, the store ran smoother than it had in years. Employees showed up on time, not because they feared schedules being cut, but because they trusted the system to honor their work. Customers noticed the difference in every smile, every bag packed with care. Emma still worked the register, but her role had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She trained new hires on the updated system, teaching them how to log their hours, how to double-check their pay, how to protect themselves with knowledge she once had to guard alone. The notebook that had once been her shield now rested in Jackson's office, a reminder that even the smallest voice could start a reform. One evening, Jackson stood outside the store, watching employees clock out under the orange glow of the parking lot lights. They laughed together, lighthearted, without the weight of doubt on their shoulders. He let the moment sit, before speaking softly, almost like a voice carried beyond the walls. A company doesn't fall apart because of competitors. It falls apart when its own people believe no one cares. When good workers start thinking their effort is invisible, that's the beginning of the end. Leadership isn't about being noticed, it's about noticing others. Integrity isn't optional, it's the ground we stand on. For him, this wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't revenge against Mark or Tyler. It was about rebuilding something that spreadsheets could never measure: trust. The kind of trust that kept Emma smiling through her shift, that let customers feel at ease, that made employees believe their company valued them. As the sun dipped lower, Jackson walked to his car, the sounds of the store fading behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The work was already done, and the change would outlast him. Back on the road, his reflection was simple. Scandals might catch headlines, but real justice often arrives quietly through paychecks corrected, voices acknowledged, and dignity restored. That was the story worth telling. And that's where today's story ends. If this story moved you, please take a second to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more stories like this one to life. And tell us in the comments, have you ever worked a job where you felt invisible, like your effort didn't matter? Share your story below. You never know who might need to hear it. Thank you for watching. And until next time, remember, true leadership isn't about power, it's about fairness.